Hey there, everyone, and welcome to episode number 8 of the Just Asia podcast. My name is Kevin. I'm your host. I'm a Canadian living here in Asia, and I'm here to talk to you about life in this part of the world. Welcome to episode number 8. I'm really excited to be here, really excited for you guys to be here as well. This episode is going to be a bit different because it's the first episode where I have a guest on. Now, this is kind of reminiscent of the Just Japan podcast, the podcast I had for many years, and the way that I'll be talking to different foreigners living in Asia, talking about their experiences, people who do very different things. Of course, I'm not living in Japan. I'll be there in a couple of months on holiday, but so the scope is a lot more broad. In our first episode with a guest, episode number 8, I've got Andrew Higgins. Higgins in Japan on YouTube. Andrew Higgins is an awesome guy who was on the Just Japan podcast several times over the years, and I was very happy to have him take the time to come onto this episode and chat with me to basically catch up, and that's what we do. We catch up on things. We haven't talked in years. We've chatted from time to time on the DMs in Twitter, but that's really it. So it's fantastic, and you guys are going to like this a lot too. I'm already setting up some interviews with people who are living very interesting lives here in China, people who are transitioning out of China, moving to other countries in Asia, and it's going to be a lot of fun coming up, and I hope you guys are going to like it. I know you guys are going to like it. Now, let's see what's going on. Some other different things that are happening. Some of you may be listening to this on YouTube. I will be putting this episode up on YouTube, especially since Andrew Higgins is a YouTube content creator. The audio version will be up on my YouTube channel, Busan Kevin. So if you are listening to this on YouTube and you like this episode, you think it's cool, and you want to catch all the back catalog and all the future content, make sure you go below into the show information and subscribe under the video. This podcast is on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Spotify, and a bunch of other places where you can listen to it. So go subscribe to the audio version, because most episodes will be audio. Sometimes they'll be up here in video form as well, but most of the time they will be in audio. Well, yeah. So that being said, what's up with me? What's going on right now? It is the Qingming holiday here in China, which is the traditional tomb cleaning holiday. A lot of countries in Asia have similar holidays, events where people would basically travel to their ancestral hometowns in order to pay homage to their family members who have passed on by cleaning their tombs, their graves. Much like, of course, in Japan, there is the Obon holiday. So, it's a tradition in many cultures. So that's happening right now, and it coincides with our spring break at my school. Our spring break is a little bit brief this year. Most schools would have 9 days. There's other schools in Asia that have 2 full weeks. But our calendar was adjusted due to COVID stuff that was going on in the zero COVID days here in China. But on the bright note, although our spring break is short, we do end our school year a few weeks earlier than we would have, than a lot of other schools do. So I finished, my last day of teaching is May 31st, which makes it easier for us to, we leave China earlier than we planned. And we are moving, so there we go. All right, what else has been up? Not a whole lot, guys, to report on since episode number 7. It's just been a week of a few days of working and slogging. I'm recording this on Wednesday, the 5th of April. In the morning, I'm at the recording studio at school. I'm the only person in the building aside from a security guard because, of course, everyone else is on holiday. Not a lot. Last weekend was pretty low key. My daughter was out playing with friends, hanging out with friends that she's trying to get the most out of in the last couple of months here in China. I hung out with my son, had a fantastic cheeseburger. Go to my Instagram over at JLandKev, Instagram at JLandKev. Link is below, and you can check out some pictures of that delicious burger at an artisanal hamburger place called Baya Burger Concept in SeaWorld in Shenzhen, in Shekou. If you're ever in Shenzhen, it's a place worth checking out. It's very pricey, but it's very worth it. It's a great sometimes treat. I said to my son, we were walking around looking for a place to eat, and he's like, Dad, what do you want to eat? I said, I'm craving a hamburger. He's like, well, let's go to McDonald's. And I'm like, no. I want a decent hamburger. So we went to a very nice place. Yeah, so that's basically it. I've been playing with my macro lens again on my iPhone. For those who know me, know that I'm really into nature photography and wildlife photography and entomology. I'm a big insect nerd, so I've been taking some great photos of bugs and snails and things very up close. I'm sharing those on I have basically like an environmental education, kind of more professional Instagram. It's like it kind of showcases what I do in school as a teacher and my nature photography, and that's at Shizen Wildlife. So that link will be below as well. And that's really about it, guys. That's all I've been doing. Again, I was lucky enough to sit down with Andrew and have this great conversation, which you guys are going to enjoy. So without further ado, Mr. Andrew Higgins. Here I am, folks, with the first official guest of the Just Asia podcast, episode number 8, and I'm here with Andrew Higgins. Andrew, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be your first guest on your new podcast.
Awesome. And for those who are carryovers from the Just Japan podcast, and you know who you are, I'm not sure who you are, but you know who you are. Andrew is on many episodes, I believe, of the Just Japan podcast. You're on several episodes talking about a wide variety of topics. I think everything from teaching to just shooting the breeze, I guess. Shooting the breeze in Japan. But you were on a lot. But now the Just Japan podcast ended a long time ago. Once I left Japan, I kind of lost the mojo to only focus on Japan content, obviously. But how have you been doing, sir?
Good. Like it's been, well, as of March, March 19th, it's 11 years in Japan for me. So
wow,
it's been quite a wild ride.
11 years. Yeah. And okay, so for those who may not have listened to those old episodes of the Just Japan podcast, I was wondering if you could just introduce yourself, briefly. The what do they call it? The oh gosh, I'm going to say the Canadian version of it. We say the Coles Notes. What do you call that in America? When they'd have like the books that are like a short version that you'd buy. Never mind.
Oh yeah, no, I know what you're talking about. Like the Spark Notes.
I don't know, but like a short version, it's like a
Reader's Digest version.
Yeah, in Canada we call them Coles Notes, but okay.
Okay.
A Coles Notes version, a short version of kind of who you are, where you're from, and a little bit about what you've been doing in Japan.
Yeah. Well, so originally I came to Japan in 2000. So I'm going to date myself here as to how old I am. I graduated high school in 2000 and had a 2-week trip to Japan to just kind of like explore Japan, really. It was kind of just like a sightseeing tour. But kind of, I had always had interest in Japan. There was like a little bit of like the anime interest, of course, and some other interests as well. But just had an interest in Japan. And so then when I graduated high school, I had this opportunity to come to Japan. I really felt like this is where I needed to live. This is where I wanted to be, but didn't really know how to get here. It was kind of in 2000, your options were really limited on how to get to Japan. And since I just graduated high school, that was, something that was probably, a few years off for me. Couldn't just fly here and decide to move here. You kind of have to have a job and a visa and all that good fun stuff. But so then I kind of worked for a few years. Didn't go to college right away. Worked for a few years. Eventually made my way into college, and then in 2008 made it back to Japan again, where I was volunteering at a private international school with their summer English program. Okay. And was like, oh, I could come to Japan and I could be an English teacher. Like that's a thing that you could do. Yeah. And so I was in college at the time. I was a junior in college. And so I came back from college, switched my major junior year, which I highly suggest to everyone. Just, do 2 years of college and then throw it all away. Not really throw it all away. I did have a lot of classes and stuff that did transfer to my new major, but decided to major in TESOL.
Okay.
And so 2010 is when I actually graduated from college, and then by 2011 had a job lined up, and then moved here in 2012. So it was pretty quick, the last part of everything, but just the whole getting here and not knowing how to get here, and what career to get to Japan under kind of took a little bit of time. But yeah, and then ever since then I've been teaching. I've worked everything from kindergartens to vice presidents of companies, teaching English to them. So kind of everything that you could imagine teaching wise. So and I've been doing that since 2012. So
wow. So like you said, 11 years now. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Now I came across you because we were both content creators. You were doing the YouTube thing.
Yeah.
And how did that all start? How did you get into content creation in Japan?
Well, so when I knew I wanted to come to Japan, I started looking on YouTube and trying to find people that lived in Japan. And of course you come across like some of the big name people that live in Tokyo or do content like that. And that didn't really appeal to me in a sense of like, nothing against what they were making. Like, I'm not trying to like disparage their channels or anything.
Yeah.
But the content was not like, it was more like geared towards like tourism. And I was trying to move to Japan. And so I came across channels like yours where it was more everyday life and more, this is what to expect while you're living in Japan. And to me, that was infinitely more helpful than, somebody's experience at the robot cafe. Like those videos are fine and fun to watch. But like for me at the time, I needed like, what's going to happen during rainy season? Or what's going to like, what can I expect?
Day-to-day stuff.
Yeah. Like if I'm going to be working at a public school versus a private school, what should I expect? That kind of stuff, that the day-to-day, like, hey, here's a 7-Eleven and here's, not just, oh, here's all the wacky food that you can buy, but like, hey, you can pay your bills at 7-Eleven, or if you need to use an ATM, usually like, well, at the time it was pretty much 7-Eleven was
true. 7 bank runs, right?
Yeah. But just simple stuff like that where it was, and that's how I found your channel, was just like, it was just a normal, like, hey, this is life in Japan. And that's what I needed. Mm-hmm. And then once I moved here, part of it was I want to be able to show my like friends and family back home, like, hey, I didn't just drop off the end of the earth, I might be in Japan, but kind of like, here's what I'm doing. My first school I was able to walk to because it was a 2-minute walk. So there was a lot of time to just make a quick video in the morning on the way to work of like, hey, I'm going to work. Here's what I'm planning on doing this week. And, it was kind of just my way of like keeping my friends and family up to date.
Yeah.
But then also as I started making more videos and doing things like that, I was more of like, what can I do to kind of like give back to like channels like yours, where it was like it helped me out. Yeah. So what can I do to make content that helps other people out? And like, I did like the Higgins Eats Japan, where I'd eat the giant Big Mac from McDonald's and do goofy stuff like that. Or the throwing random things downstairs videos that somehow people thought were hilarious, like just stupid stuff like that. But the main content was there to help people that wanted to either be teachers or want to just know what it's like teaching in Japan. Yeah. And so that was kind of what the channel turned out to be at the end, was just what can I do on my day to day to like help out other people that want to come to Japan.
Well, you know what the interesting thing is, like, sometimes when we create that content and then we look down the road, maybe we don't, see what it might be in years or what people might make from it. And it's really interesting. Even I find myself, I look back sometimes at my back catalog of videos on the Busan Kevin channel, And like we left we left Japan 6 years ago for China for work, and my kids were 4 and 7 at the time when we left, or still 4 and 6, I suppose, at the time when we left. And like my daughter doesn't remember much about Japan living there because she was so little. But we've been watching some from time to time. We'll watch these. I call them day in the life videos, where I'd literally film like 30 or 40 clips and just throw them all together of like a full day of literally just like going downtown in Kobe and going shopping and eating at a restaurant and going to the park to play. And now I'll play one of these and I put it on the TV, and my wife loves it. The kids love watching it. I'm so glad I did that because it's kind of neat in a way. This kind of modern twist on home movies, like the old 8mm video with the reels, and we're watching, but we're kind of seeing these moments. But I know what you mean, and like I also agree that I there's a place, and I love some of the content that some of those kind of bigger name YouTubers make. It's really amazing. Like you take someone like Chris Broad, the Abroad in Japan stuff. He's funny as heck. It's so professional. Yeah. Like it's fantastic. My kids are actually huge Abroad in Japan fans. They love watching his stuff. But it's so different, right? It's great entertainment. It's great for tourists and for visitors. Yeah. But it's really different than the kind of living there stuff,
Right.
But yeah, so like so you've been here for 11 years now. You've been in Japan for 11 years. And I'm curious because like I'm coming to the end of the road here for me in China. And we've got 2 months left and we're leaving, and we're leaving for good. And we're going to be coming to Japan for a month in the summer, and then Canada for a few weeks, and then we move to Malaysia. I will freely admit that I'm at a point now in China where like I need to leave. I mean, I probably arguably could have said that like a year and a half ago, because we were being barricaded in our homes with zero COVID. But it's at a point now where that's all done with. Borders are open now, blah, 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 blah. But it is really time for me to leave. And there's like, and I think even in Japan, I love Japan dearly, but there were times, where things got a bit tough or maybe irritating. I'm wondering, have there been any, what have been some of the challenges for you over those 11 years? Have there been any times where you just would get really frustrated and you're like, I'm done with this place? Or has it all been wine and roses,
Oh no, totally. It's totally been wine and roses. No, I mean, oh my gosh. Well, so we were talking about like making videos and stuff, and I kind of fell off from making YouTube videos. And it initially started, it's going to get kind of like, this will start out kind of dark and depressing, but it will come back to being, hopefully positive and
okay.
But so at the time I was working at a public school, and so in the back of my mind, I'd always expected this to happen. I always kind of knew that this was a possibility. I came into school one day. This is a junior high.
Okay.
And the teacher's office was packed full of people.
Okay.
And usually at that time of the morning, like 8 o'clock, 8:30 in the morning, there's teachers in there. They might have a meeting, but it's usually not as crowded. And it was a silence that it was just it was a deafening silence. Like it was just so quiet. And I just instantly knew something was wrong.
Okay.
And I sat down on my desk and I kind of started going through my routine of getting my computer out and getting stuff ready for class, and no one was really saying anything. And the principal just kind of stands up and says, well, hopefully what did he say? Hopefully we can make it through this. And then he walked into his office and closed the door. Okay. And I was just like, oh my gosh, like what is going on? And one of the teachers came over and sat down next to me and said, one of the first year junior high students committed suicide last night.
Oh gosh.
And it was one of my former students that I had in elementary school and had taught in elementary school and then also in junior high.
Oh.
And Like at that point I was like, it's one of those sad things to say, like you kind of expect it in Japan because just the
You just hear so much about it on the news and the news.
yeah. And I was just like, when is this going to happen in my school?
Mm.
And so that was what, 2001 that happened. And so that year was really rough, and I kind of stopped making videos because it just kind of didn't seem important. Like I didn't really have the motivation.
Yeah.
And then 2022, I decided that I was going to leave my current job and pursue another job where I would be essentially heading up like a brand new school and heading up this brand new thing. And I kind of thought that it would be a nice getaway from my current situation.
Yeah.
And you and I've talked about this offline a little bit, but
it
turned out to be a little bit more stressful, starting
didn't go as you planned.
Yeah, starting something from scratch and starting something from kind of just an idea was very overwhelming. So that last year, 2022, was pretty crazy in the fact that it was just, there was so much going on. And so I kind of took a break from YouTube altogether. Yeah. And so, yeah, there were moments definitely when I was like, is what I'm doing important? Is teaching English important? Is being in Japan important? Questioning a lot of those things. And since then I've moved back. I left that job last year. Because it was kind of a big growing moment for me where I was like, I tend to stick around in things too long.
Okay.
I kind of like, I kind of can talk myself into, well, it's not that bad,
when it is, but
when it really is, but I can, it's not that bad, I can. And so I think last year especially was a big learning moment for me of like realizing when I needed to walk away from something.
Yeah.
And whether that was good for anyone else, it was good for me. Like I needed to realize that like, maybe I don't need to be in this situation anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's okay to kind of walk away from something that you were working on that isn't working. Instead of just saying, no, it'll eventually, get better. I think that was one of my issues with when I first came to Japan. I worked for a dispatch company. Yeah. And they weren't the greatest, but I worked there for 5 years because I continually just was like, I can make it better. I can, things will change. And they didn't. So, I really think like last year especially was just a big, like, learning when to step away from something and be okay with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And say like, I tried this, it didn't work, and that's okay. Not everything works. And so
sometimes we got to step away from something, like you said. I mean, it's a term that gets thrown around a lot these days, but you hear all about the well-being and mental well-being. It is.
Oh yeah.
And especially during the COVID times, where, people were going through so much more stressors than ever before. And they really, a lot of people realized that they never actually looked at themselves and realized that they need to take care of themselves, because often we're so focused on those people around us, the students we teach, your coworkers. You don't want to let them down, but you got to realize that if you're not in a good place, if you're not in a good mental place, you aren't really that valuable maybe to those around you. Especially, when you meet those, like, and we meet them everywhere in every country you live in, you meet those like bitter foreigners, the angry foreigners. We've all worked with them.
You're like, why are you still here? What is
the people who like, and I've met them in Korea, I've met them in Japan, I've met them here in China, who sit around and use terms like, these people, I hate it when these people, like I worked with a guy in Japan years ago who'd walk into the staff room and just start whining about everything. And he would use the term these people. And he was referring to like, you know, like 60% or 70% of the people in the room were Japanese, and those were those people. And like, he kind of failed to understand that, you know, they all speak English and they all understand everything you're saying, and they're seething inside and they're just not showing it.
Right.
But you know, you don't want to get to a point where you're one of those people, I suppose, you know?
Yeah, definitely. And I think had I stuck around at that previous job from last year, I think maybe I mean, who's to say? Like, but I feel like, you know, it could have been another situation that I just was in a place for too long.
Yeah.
And, you know, just wasn't happy with. So,
well, that's like with us. I mean, I'm going to be honest. I mean, I haven't had a chance to talk to you in a long time in this manner. We used to podcast quite frequently.
Oh yeah.
But I mean, it's, you know, with the O'Shea family here in China, I mean, we've been in many regards unhappy for a long time. Obviously, who would be happy with zero COVID? You know, people have watched on TV what happened in Shanghai with the lockdowns and stuff. And we went through similar lockdowns here. You know, we were miserable, but everyone was. And Chinese people were even more miserable than we were. It wasn't just the foreigners suffering. Everyone was suffering. But we realized, you know, we had a lot of loyalty to our school. So we stayed longer than in many ways we would have liked to have left last year, but we stayed longer because our school bent over backwards to help us and did amazing things for us when others didn't. So we felt a real strong sense of loyalty. But then after, you know, we decided that this would be the last year, and we decided it's just, you know, a lot of my Chinese friends and colleagues are like, but Kevin, like, China's open now. Like, you can travel. Are you going to stay? And we're just like, no, you know what? It's time to move on. It is time to move on. And it doesn't matter if things are open. We're moving on. And then I just I leave it at that. I don't share grievances. You know, I just say, time to move on. And that's what we're doing. And we're really excited to move on. And I think I personally feel a happiness and invigoration that I haven't felt in a long time. And, you know, I'm still a teacher. I'm not going off to like make $1 million here, but I feel fantastic about just doing it somewhere else now, you know?
Right.
It's just going to be exciting to move, you know, and you know, sometimes it's good, like you said, it's just good to walk away.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know? But yeah, wow. Well, okay. So, you're right. That was, that kind of went dark. But I mean, it's a sad reality of life in a place like Japan. And it's a sad reality of being an educator, of working in a school. These things happen not just in Japan, but elsewhere as well. I suppose, look, I'm fortunate enough to be teaching really little itty bitty kids. I teach kindergarten, and that's obviously not something you have to deal with.
Right.
But I can only imagine some of the stressors of those who teach upper school and teach teenagers and what they go through. I can't imagine. But okay, so, you know, you've been in Japan now for 11 years, and I think one of the things I want to kind of look at with some of these kind of first episodes of this podcast, I want to talk to expats who are living in different countries in Asia and kind of find out, you know, why have they stayed so long where they are, you know, because I guess, you know, when I was a young teacher in South Korea, like in 2002 and 3 and 4, I think like the average teacher I met there would only stay for 1 or 2 years and off they'd go. And that was it. But then I get to Japan and I started meeting people who had been there for 10 years and 15 years and 20 years and 25 years. Why do you think you stay there so long? And why do you think in general, a lot of expats seem to stay in Japan maybe longer than in other places?
That's a good question. I think to answer the second part, I think it's not difficult to live in Japan. And so I think that, I think it's a country that's fairly, I mean, it's obviously welcoming to foreigners for the most part. I mean, there's always, you know, people you're going to run into that don't like foreigners, but that's, I mean, literally every country. So
yeah.
I mean, where are you going to go? That's 100% perfect. But, yeah, I think Japan's a pretty easy country to live in. You can kind of function on your own and without if you're the type of person that needs to function with, you know, just on your own and not have to interact with society a whole lot, you can kind of get away with that in Japan.
Okay.
You know, you can, if you have your job set up and you can go to the grocery store and the convenience store and the little shops around. Like, you don't really have to interact with people, I guess.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. Yeah.
You can kind of, and I feel like Japanese people there's always the stereotype of like, they don't really show emotion, or they aren't outgoing and won't talk to you, which I think it's more of the case of like, they just don't want to bother you.
Yeah. Okay.
It's more of like, just let people live their life. Like, I mean, I've had random conversations with tons of people, at the grocery store, or at, train stations, stuff like that. People are willing to talk to you, but I think for the most part, people just leave you alone, and they just kind of leave each other alone.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm here. I'm at the grocery store. There's no need for me to bother anybody. So I'm not going to really have any conversation. I feel it's like a couple of years ago, I was back home in the States and was getting my hair cut, and I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden someone starts talking to me, and I kind of look around the room quickly, and I'm like, who is this person talking to? They're talking to me. Like, Why are you talking to me? Like, I'm just waiting to get my hair cut. Like, just stuff like that kind of, you don't really get a whole lot of in Japan. No, there sometimes you will, but like, if you're waiting to get your haircut, everybody's usually just sitting there quietly waiting to get their haircut. They're not striking up conversations with just random people.
Well, I mean, I think like when you look at, for example, the life that when you watch, let's say, big YouTubers, the big name YouTubers who have millions of subscribers in Japan, and you look at their lives, and for those who are sitting in America or Canada and they're watching those video blogs, and they're like, wow, like what an exciting life these people have. Well, in a case like that, those people, if they're professional YouTubers, they have to make their life look exciting because that's what pays the bills.
Right.
They have to travel to every prefecture in Japan. They have to try all these, to stay in different types of inns and wacky hotels. And they have to go to robot cafes. They need to do these things because that's how they make their living, right? They need to show that interesting aspect, the cool, fascinating. But we're just kind of back to what you're saying. I think of my own existence when I lived there. I cycle commuted to work. So I get on my bicycle, I'd bike from Port Island across the bridge and along the mainland a bit to a place like kind of between Port Island and Roko Island where my school was. I go to work, I finish work, I get on my bicycle, and I go back home. And then my wife and kids would be home, and that was it. And then I go for a walk at night, or I go to the Family Mart. Or maybe I'd stop at the supermarket on the way home, and I wouldn't talk to anybody or interact with anybody. And I just do that like day after day after day, right?
Yeah.
So I think like one of the things where I had to say, like with the Just Japan podcast, I need guests on my podcast because it's very limited what I can talk about, because my life is very mundane. I was happy. Yeah. I was happy with that, but that's what it was.
Yeah. A couple of years ago, I would say it was a pretty decent sized YouTube channel reached out to me and said, hey, we're going to stop doing this channel, but we want you to do the channel for us from now on.
Okay.
And I was like, wow, that's really, I'm honored. Mm-hmm. And then I was like, but I have a boring life. Yeah. Like at the time I was living in Ibaraki Prefecture, which if you don't know, Ibaraki Prefecture is very rural. It's close to Tokyo if you look at it on a map, but it's countryside and farmland, and it's great. But it's not what people want to see, I don't think. I mean, some people do want to see Japanese countryside, but it's not what it wasn't the content that they were producing, and it wasn't what I couldn't have done,
the thing that they were looking for, maybe.
Yeah. And so, and that's the thing I think a lot of people kind of get in their mind is like, oh, Japan is, has all of this fun and exciting stuff, which it does. Mm-hmm. But I think a lot of it is geared towards tourists. And once you get down to it, like Japan is just another country,
Yeah.
It's, and not to say that it's boring, but it definitely has its just boring normal parts like every other country does. And so sometimes that's what you see. But I think that's also what makes it easy to kind of live here too, is you don't feel, or I've not ever felt pressure or, I mean, I've also never lived in Tokyo proper. So like, I mean, like right now I'm less than an hour away from Tokyo, but it's still
It's a whole
kind
different
of
world.
Yeah, an hour outside of Tokyo, and it's completely different. But yeah, like I don't know. There's always people that kind of dog on being an English teacher, like, oh, well, that's, this the starter job that everybody gets. And then as soon as they can find something better, they do something different in Japan or whatever. Like I came here as an English teacher, and so that's what I wanted to do, and that's what I'm doing. So like there's not really anything else that I would want to really do.
That's what you studied in university, right?
Yeah. So
like you were working towards that goal. That was your goal, right?
Right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's like with me, like with me, like I teach kindergarten right now. I mean, like people are like, how can you do it? Why do you want to do that? I'm like, well, because that's what I do. I'm a teacher. Like I went to school in Canada to become a teacher because I wanted to become a teacher in Canada. I just happened to meet a woman from Japan. So I moved to Japan, and I'm just doing what I do in Japan. The same thing I do in Canada. If I was in Canada, I would have been teaching in a primary school.
Right.
Because there you go. Because that's what I do. And when people say, well, do you think you'd ever want to start up a business or something? I'm like, well, I'm not a business person. I'm a teacher.
Yeah. I would like to, but I don't know how to run a business.
Maybe one day when when I retire from teaching, maybe I'll start some kind of business for some income doing something. But what that would be, I don't know, because I haven't thought too deeply, because again, I'm not a business person.
Right.
But yeah. So, I mean, I think you've already kind of touched on some things with that kind of the more general, why would people want to live here? I guess that kind of maybe points a bit towards you too. It sounds like life can be comfortable. And that's probably why you've chosen to stay 11 years.
I feel comfortable here. I don't feel, I mean, there are times when, things happen and you do feel that like out of place feeling, I guess, where you're like, oh, not necessarily like I don't belong here, but I'm trying to just the feeling of like I'm not Japanese, and that's fine because I'm not Japanese, so there's certain things that I'm not going to fully understand why certain things happen or why people do things a certain way. And that's just part of
I think that's
living here.
I think that's part of the expat life, though. Like if you're a foreigner living abroad, if you're a foreigner living in another country, you're always going to be a foreigner living in that other country.
Right.
And it doesn't matter how much you maybe learn the language, learn about the culture, especially if it's a homogenous culture like Japan or China or Korea, pretty much, most countries in definitely Northeast Asia, a man like you or a man like me, they just look at us and there we are. We're different, Yeah.
Yeah. There's nothing that I can do to help me blend in.
Yeah.
I'm still going to be 6'1" on the train, having to duck under doorways and stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so it's interesting, but I mean, it's, so I mean, it's cool. I mean, like I miss Japan dearly. I would love to go back, and it's interesting. I mean, it's maybe my wife and I plan to in the future, but it wasn't on the cards this time. Well, we looked at work and stuff, and money's always a factor. And I know a lot of people who like listen to my podcast and followed my content, like, why aren't you going back, Kevin? I could have gotten a job, but when I have to look at all the different aspects, and going to be honest, the jobs in Japan just don't pay well compared to
No,
jobs in other countries, and
they don't.
not paid well at all. And even as an international school teacher, um, they don't pay nearly as well as international schools in other countries. So I
Yeah,
have to look at, I've got a son who's in middle school now. And then after high school, he wants to go to university to get a history degree, and someone's got to pay for that stuff. And,
right.
and I've got a daughter who's, I mean, she's still in primary school, but I've got, a family to support, and it's a matter of just like mathematics and kind of looking at how do I support the family the best. So yeah, as much as I love Japan, at the end of the day, when I know that I can pay the bills better somewhere else, we decided to go somewhere else. And I guess that's that we all have and it's interesting. Every foreigner you meet has got such a very different story, right?
Right.
And different things. But I mean, as far as I'm curious, like you're there now. You've moved recently. You're living outside of Tokyo. Do you think you might get on that content creation horse again in the future and start doing some stuff?
I would like to. Like, I keep thinking about it, and it's one of those things where I just need to start doing it again.
That's kind of why this podcast started for me. Like, I was kind of in the doldrums. I was producing a lot of professional content. So I was when I say professional, I mean like not as in like, wow, it sounds so amazing now, Kevin. I mean like I was literally making podcasts about teaching and about education, and the audience were other teachers and educators around the world. And a big part of it's like the professional development thing. But I was looking at like my brand as a teacher and helping me get jobs in the future. But that, that content is content that only teachers would want to listen to. So with just a couple of months left in China, all of a sudden with that kind of light on the end of the tunnel for me, I got excited about creating content again. Because I also just recently in the last few months started making some YouTube videos again, because I was in a situation where anytime I'd pick up my camera and start filming something around the city, I would have strange men come up and like yell at me.
Oh gosh.
To stop filming. Because there's a lot of paranoia about foreigners filming things, which is kind of the government's line telling people, be careful of foreigners filming things. They may be, causing trouble, or maybe against like national security and blah, 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 blah. So I would literally get harassed when I would start filming stuff. So eventually I was just like, I'm so done with this. And then maybe like 6 months would go by and like, I want to try a YouTube live stream. I got a new DJI gimbal and I'd start walking around and filming, and then boom, 10 minutes later, someone would come up and start putting their hand in front of my camera and kind of yelling at me to go away. And it was like, oh,
wow.
Yeah. So, but again, knowing that I'm leaving now, that kind of content creation fire has been relit under me.
Yeah.
And I want to share stuff. And I think what it's doing for me is I still don't plan on filming much before I leave. But like once I hit Japan in June, I'll be making a lot of stuff. And yeah, it'll be groovy.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I would. I definitely want to get back into making videos. Like I'm doing stuff now, but it's for my job, and so like that's a different.
Yeah.
Making Instagram posts and videos and editing videos and stuff like that. But that's for them. That's not me.
Yeah.
So, I definitely would like to get back into it. I know there was somebody that I worked with last year, that said, wait a second, are you Higgins in Japan? And I just laughed and I went, yeah, just because I didn't know what their response was going to be. Yeah, that's me. And like, oh, I listened to the Just Japan podcast and I've heard you on there like a bunch of times. And I was like, oh, great. Thank you. So
cool.
Yeah. And so,
it's so neat when those dots are connected, right?
Yeah. It was totally unexpected. And they were like, you should make videos. You should keep making videos. You should make some stuff like your Friday. I was like, your Friday video things were good. I was like, oh, wow. Thanks. Like I didn't, it was,
I like the Friday video things. Yeah.
Yeah.
Car, driving and talking.
And now, unfortunately, now I get off work so late that it'd just be me
Darkness.
driving in the dark. So
Well,
it doesn't show up very well. So
it's interesting when that happens, because like over the years I made so much content that like sometimes even a teacher will find me on like teacher Twitter on Twitter and be like, oh wow, like I remember I watched your YouTube videos when I was in university, and then I came to Japan and was an English teacher, and then I went back to school and became, and now I'm an international school teacher working like here in Thailand at this big school, and I'm just like, wow, that's so cool and neat,
yeah. There was an anime podcast that the hosts listened to your podcast and reached out to me.
Oh, really?
And wanted to interview me on their anime podcast, just about life in Japan and just stuff like that.
Well, there you go. That's so cool.
And it was just a random like, they're like, hey, we just listened to this podcast about Japan. We want to kind of do an interview. Do you want to do this? I was like, oh, sure. Like that's cool. Like, I don't mind.
Nice.
Yeah.
Groovy. Well, I mean, yeah, well, I don't want to keep you. It's late. You're an hour ahead of me, folks. You guys, out there listening, it's approaching 10 o'clock for Mr. Higgins. And I know I turned into a pumpkin at that time. I'm But so I want to thank you for taking the time and stopping by, being the first guest on the Just Asia podcast.
Oh, no, thank you.
Your name was actually mentioned by someone a few weeks back in a good way.
Okay.
in the on the Facebook page, I've kind of revamped, brought back the old. I had a Facebook page for the Just Japan podcast. Actually, I think it was just like a Busan Kevin Facebook page at one point, and when I had the Just Japan podcast, I rebranded it. But I started posting stuff there again a few months ago, and it's kind of coming back to life slowly. People are realizing, oh wait, I was subscribed to this page, and there's content here. But someone is like, oh, you got to get back some of those folks you used to talk to, like Higgins in Japan and PJ and stuff. And I'm like, at the beginning, I was like, yeah, I don't know, we'll see what happens. And then I'm like, yeah, I want guests on. I want to talk to people. I think my life is definitely more interesting than it was in the days of riding my bicycle back and forth to work.
Yeah.
I didn't think I'd live in a place where, at that point I wasn't being locked down and there wasn't all that kind of drama. Maybe in the future I'll be back to the driving my bicycle back and forth, that kind of life. Cause that's good too. But yeah, I definitely can't wait to get more folks on and probably have you on again in the future episode. Maybe get you and PJ together or something.
Sure.
Yeah. Actually, PJ and I we co-host a regular podcast about a game called Munzie.
That's right. Yeah.
It's like a geocaching kind of game. But yeah. So, Andrew, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, no problem.
For those of you out there listening, go on to YouTube and type in Higgins in Japan. And
there hasn't been anything recent, but there's a lot of stuff on there. I was thinking today, I was like, I haven't made anything recently, but there is a very big collection of the
big library of stuff
of like, just if you bypass like the goofy videos of just the like the Friday video thing where it's more serious of like talking about like what to expect at school and if you're working in a public school, like kind of the day-to-day goings on and how to deal with certain situations and stuff like that. So
no, it's fantastic. So go there, check that out, guys. I'll put a link in the show notes. And you're also on Twitter. And gosh, what's that? It's not right in front of me right now. What's your handle? Higgins in Japan? Andrew Higgins?
On Twitter, it's Higgins82. And then on Instagram, it's Higbones, Higgbones, Higbones.
Okay, Higbones on Instagram and Higgins82 on Twitter. Yeah, cool. Well, Andrew, thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem.
And that does it. And I want to thank Andrew for taking the time to stop by the Just Asia podcast for episode number 8. Higgins in Japan on YouTube, Higgins82 on Twitter. Go check out the links. Also, I think he left his Instagram. So all those links will be down below in the show notes. If you're listening to this in Apple Podcasts or Amazon or Spotify, it's all that information at the bottom of the podcast. All the links are there. Also, make sure you go and follow our Facebook page at Just Japan Stuff. I know it says Just Japan Stuff, but it's Just Asia Stuff. But, there's a great community there already, so why reinvent the wheel? Of course, follow me on Instagram. Those links are below. Follow me on Twitter at @MadFromApple. I'm super active on Twitter. It's a mix of travel stuff, education stuff, because I am a professional teacher. And then just like food and news links and silliness and stuff and retweets of Japan things. So go check that out. Of course, at @MadFromApple. All those links are below. As I hiccup here, sorry, I'm always drinking fizzy water. So I'm drinking I'm very fancy. I went to an import shop and I bought a San Pellegrino. I feel like I need to say it I need to say it that way. San Pellegrino, Italian sparkling water. But it is delicious. It is, what is this? Melograno and Arancia. I don't know. It says Italian fruits. It is very tasty. I'm enjoying it a lot, even though I paid a pretty penny for it. But yeah, so that's what I'm up to, guys. Episode number 9 will be coming your way soon. We'll get at least an episode out a week of the podcast, sometimes with guests, sometimes not. And sometimes there'll be surprise story episodes popping up here and there. I hope you guys are very well, wherever you are. Please take the time to share this podcast with your friends who have an interest in travel, food, Asia, content creation, all of those things. Let's help this podcast kick off and grow. I've been doing education podcasts for a long time, and there's definitely value in a place that and enjoyment, but it's fun to get back in the saddle and just literally make a podcast that's about life and travel and all that stuff. And I hope you guys are enjoying it. I definitely am getting some great feedback on Twitter and from some of you guys who are following me over from the Just Japan podcast days. And hopefully there's some new listeners out there too. And hopefully some of you are joining us via YouTube. So again, if you're checking this episode out on YouTube, check the links below and subscribe to the audio feeds. That's the best way to do things, best way to support the show. And that's it, guys. My name's Kevin O'Shea. The name is Irish, but I'm a Canadian. 21 years in Asia. I've lived in Korea. I've lived in Japan, China, leaving China now, and going to be calling Malaysia home soon. So I'm all over the map, guys. And I'm doing it with my family, with my wife and my kids, who are super duper awesome in every way. So hope you're doing well, folks, and I will be talking to you again very soon.